Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Friday, January the 2nd, 2026. When I prepare these videos, I rely quite heavily on an ephemeris. So an ephemeris is a table of the planets' positions, and in particular, I use Raphael's ephemeris. So Raphael's ephemeris, it comes out every year. So this is the ephemeris for 2025. But the problem is that the ephemeris for 2026 is not out yet. Apparently, it's coming out on January the 15th, so like 2 weeks into the new year. And I certainly felt a feeling of panic when I saw that Raphael's ephemeris was late. And, this ephemeris has been printed since 1795, and there was sort of this panic, maybe it's the end of an era, but I was quite relieved to see that it is supposedly coming out in a couple of weeks' time. But it does have some implications, because it means that I have to use a different system for working out where the planets are. I have to use my computer. So my computer program, the Kepler program, I can press a few buttons and it will spit out the aspects every day. And I can sort of tailor make it, and I can sort of put in some things I want. For example, Chiron. Now, Raphael's ephemeris does have the positions of Chiron, but it doesn't spend a lot of time on it. It just has a few tables at the bottom, and it only gives the positions, every now and then. So I was able to discover when I got my computer printout that actually Chiron goes direct today. I wasn't really following Chiron so closely. So Chiron comes to a standstill at I think something like 22 Aries or something like that. And so I need to talk about that. I've no idea what it means for Chiron to go stationary direct, but I thought it might be a good idea to comment on it. I also want to comment on this fire in Switzerland. You associate Switzerland with everything being well organized. You don't expect that kind of a tragedy, disaster in Switzerland, but it did happen in the city of, I think, Crans, Montana, and is that what it's called? Anyway, a lot of people were killed, and so I thought I would look at the horoscope of this fire to see if we can sort of notice anything of any astrological significance. But first of all, before we look at Chiron Direct and the fire in Switzerland, I want to consider the astrology and the I Ching for today. So here is a chart for today, Friday, January the 2nd, 2026. Over the course of the video, I might every now and then call it 2025, maybe still getting used to the new year. So as far as what's happening today, we have the moon moving into Cancer. So the moon moves into Cancer London time just after 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 13:09. So that will be sort of just after 2 o'clock in the afternoon if you're in Europe. So if you are in Europe or Africa, then first part of the day, moon is in Gemini. Then early afternoon, it does move into Cancer. So there is a change there, and I think that you could argue that moon in Cancer is a good thing. I think the moon in Gemini, it wasn't doing very much. It was separating from a square of Saturn, which isn't great. Also separating from a square of Neptune. So I think it was a bit of a problem moon in late Gemini. And of course, after it made the square of Saturn, it was void of course. Void of course is when it's made its last major aspect to a traditional planet. Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto don't count before leaving the sign. So this moon in Cancer, well, it's got a relationship with Jupiter. As soon as the moon moves into Cancer, it's starting to make a conjunction with Jupiter. Now, that conjunction is a long way off. It's 20 degrees maybe, but still, it's getting there. And the moon and Jupiter have a sort of a natural relationship with one another. The moon is in Cancer, the exaltation sign of Jupiter. Jupiter's in Cancer. So that's the sign that the moon rules. So there is a sort of a mixed reception between moon and Jupiter. So I think overall this sign change is something that we should be pleased about, although the first aspect the moon makes when it enters Cancer is an opposition to Mercury. So, moon opposition Mercury, it isn't great. In fact, we've got a T-square. As the moon changes sign, it makes a square to Neptune. It makes a square to Neptune, and then it makes the opposition to Mercury. So there could be some difficulties understanding things. People might not understand us. We might not understand them. And it's important that we don't assume that we know everything. There might be things that we've missed, and we can try to use our feelings to pick up what's going on. But of course, feelings can be treacherous, and we may be taken in the wrong direction. So I do think that moon in Cancer is a good thing, as I've just said, but we just have to remember that there is that opposition to Mercury and a square to Neptune. But as the moon gathers strength in Cancer, I think that we needn't worry so much about that, about the square to Neptune and the opposition. Well, the opposition to Mercury, at the same time, it's the same thing. It's not such a problem. But what we shouldn't forget about the moon in Cancer is that it is applying to a full moon, and this full moon. Okay, that's a feature of tomorrow. I'll be talking about it in my forecast for the weekend. But this full moon is tied up with Mars, so it's not entirely easy. Okay, maybe not today, but certainly by tomorrow, we're going to be feeling that. And moon in Cancer is looking perhaps for security, but it's up against the Sun and Mars. And so I'm not saying we should worry about it, but we should certainly be very aware of it. And as you know, if you've been listening, I think it was my video yesterday, that this full moon does have an impact on the United States, because the United States has its sun at 13 degrees 19 Cancer. This full moon is at 13 2 Cancer, something like that. So the United States is very much in focus, but I'll be talking about that in my video for the weekend. And the other thing going on today is that Chiron is going stationary direct, and as I just said in the introduction, I'm not sure what that means. I can guess, I can speculate, and later in the video, when I look in detail about Chiron going direct, I will sort of explore what this might mean. There are some charts to look at. We can look at the midpoints that Chiron is in. I think it might also be worth having a look at the chart for the moment of Chiron's discovery, because if we want to know what Chiron direct might mean, we have to really think about what Chiron is all about. Maybe we need to sort of go back to basics with Chiron. But broadly speaking, if we sort of make some generalizations about Chiron going direct, you think about its keywords. It's about perhaps having a wound. That's what they always say, the wounded healer. So some of us might feel wounded, or a wound is coming to the fore. And what else? And it can be the maverick. That's perhaps a word I overuse when describing Chiron. But it might be that some of us are aware of how we are different. And if we realize how we are different, that might give us clues about what we need to do. It's easy to just follow the crowd, do what we're told, but sometimes we have to take a stand. And maybe for some of us, this is what Chiron going stationary direct is about, especially as Chiron is stationary direct in Aries, and it's also challenged by Jupiter in Cancer. But I will be talking about Jupiter and Chiron and all of that later in the video. So that's the picture for sort of New York. If we set the chart for Sydney, Australia, at noon, the moon is at 22 degrees at 22 degrees Gemini. So if you are in Australia, New Zealand, East Asia, moon does not go into Cancer today. It stays in Gemini all day long, and that means if you are in Australasia, probably the moon square Saturn, moon square Neptune, and moon is making a sextile to Chiron as well. But the moon square Saturn, moon square Neptune may be the major aspects, and so it may not be an entirely easy day. There might be things you want to say, things you might want to do, moon in Gemini, but they come up against Saturn and Neptune. And so perhaps you shouldn't feel that you necessarily have to do anything, and things might be a bit slow or a bit frustrating, and it might take a long time to get anything done. I mean, maybe it should take a long time to get anything done. If you're in a hurry with moon square Saturn, moon square Neptune, well, things might go wrong, but perhaps moon square Saturn is going to encourage you to make sure that if you do something, you do it properly. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. And I repeat what I said yesterday: the Earth is opposition the Venus-Mars midpoint, and this aspect will continue for some time. The Earth is, of course, now starting to apply to the opposition of Mars, and that is going to stir things up. And I've already said that I'm not entirely convinced that that 2026 is going to be a sort of a peaceful year. I mean, it starts with a Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus geocentrically, and now we've got the Earth moving towards an opposition of Mars. And so do take it easy and don't allow things to upset you. That is an issue with Earth opposition Mars, but also Earth opposition the Venus-Mars midpoint. In the same way that geocentrically we have Sun conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint, it is about attraction and repulsion, and how people get on with each other, and how people present their messages, and whether or not those messages get a favourable response, which in many cases the answer might be no. And also Mars is applying to an opposition of Jupiter, so there's this this opposition coming up. It's Venus conjunct Mars plays Earth conjunct Jupiter. It is creating some stress. And if we look at this from a sort of solar system perspective, so if you see this, look at this chart and imagine that the sun is at the center of the solar system. You don't have to imagine it, because the sun is at the center of the solar system. You can see that there is sort of a bit of a disturbance here. Disturbance between Venus and Mars on one side of the sun. You've got Earth and Jupiter on the other side of the sun, and it's not an entirely comfortable position, and that's why we might be feeling a degree of sort of stress and anger down here on this planet, particularly if you're dealing with people who are out of control. And who is out of control? Well, us as rational individuals, hopefully we're not out of control, but the people who are most out of control are politicians. Other people in government, civil servants, anyone who is in a position of power. They're the ones who don't have control. That is the great irony, which I talk about again and again in astrology, that the people who have the most power have the least control, because they are instruments of the cosmos. So those are a few thoughts about the heliocentric position, and now I want to move on to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Friday, January the 2nd, 2025. Aries. Well, Chiron is going stationary direct. I mean, I don't normally talk about Chiron very much in my forecasts for the 12 signs, but, Chiron is in Aries, and I don't know how you've been feeling about Chiron in Aries. It's a slow-moving planet. It stays in Aries for much longer than a year, so it's something you're probably quite used to. But now that Chiron is going stationary direct, it might be time to think about what makes you different. Because, of course, Aries, you are different. Well, you could say we're all different, but Chiron in Aries does very much emphasize your uniqueness and what your unique contribution is. And that unique contribution is often something you have to express in a way that may not be entirely easy. You may have to make a fuss. You may have to draw attention to yourself. If other people are just not being cooperative, they're thinking about something else, they're being boring, they're just behaving like herd animals. There's nothing wrong with being a herd animal, by the way, but animals have to do what they have to do. But if people are behaving like that, sometimes you do have to make a fuss. And that could be what Chiron going direct is all about for you, Aries. And it might also be an awareness of that fundamental insult. Is there an insult? Maybe there was an insult or a wound, and you have to make up for it. And now with Chiron going direct, that might be something you can do. Now, I'm absolutely not suggesting that you have to really make an exhibition of yourself. Certainly, not right now. We do have a build up to a full moon. I mean, the moon is now edging into Cancer. It's starting to make an opposition to the sun. It's already making an opposition to Mercury, and that full moon does put some pressure on you. And you might be thinking, well, is now the right time to act? Maybe you should leave it until later. I mean, this full moon is going to be exact tomorrow on Saturday, and so Aries, perhaps you should think carefully about what it is that you want to do and how far you're prepared to go. I mean, some Arians may feel that they would like to bide their time, but that there are pressures out there that simply can't be ignored, and you may have no choice. And pressure is a word that you might be feeling today. I mean, you don't want pressure, but it is there. And some Arians may just feel that something does need to break, that it's just something's gone on for too long, and it does have to change. Now, I don't want to make you feel bad about today. I think today can be very constructive. Remember, we have got 4 planets in Capricorn: Mercury, Venus, Sun, Mars. That's a load of planets in Capricorn. And with all those planets in Capricorn, Aries, do think about what it is that you want to do. You don't have to do it necessarily today, Friday. Maybe, it's the end of a week. We just had New Year's Day yesterday. So perhaps things are a bit slow, but you can at least make the preparations and think about what you're going to do next week. What does it in the week starting on Monday, January the 5th. So that might be something you want to be thinking ahead to. So, Aries, you can't stay where you are forever. You know that. You feel that probably you do want to do something that is different, that does express your fundamental personality. but you don't want to be different just for the sake of it. You've got something to do. You've perhaps got something to put right, or even to heal. After all, Chiron is going stationary direct. Taurus. Moon is changing sign. It's moving out of Gemini and into Cancer. And when the moon moves into Cancer, it is in sort of mixed reception with Jupiter. Moon and Jupiter have a good relationship with one another. Cancer is the sign that the moon rules. It's also the sign where Jupiter is exalted. And, from your perspective, the moon in Cancer is arguably the best sign that the moon can be in. It is the third sign along from Taurus. Therefore, in the Taurian chart, the moon joys in Cancer, and so you can feel good about yourself. But that doesn't mean to say it's all easy, because the trouble is that the moon is challenged. The moon makes an opposition to Mercury. Tomorrow there is a full moon, and the moon, it's not just full, you've got the moon opposition Mars. And so with that moon opposition Mars, that could represent some tension, something that you really do sort of have to deal with. And it might be, Taurus, that there is a contrast between your natural way of doing things. You want to do everything in a way that is natural and perhaps quite spontaneous, and the other view, the other approach. Now, sometimes Taurians can be challenged to be broad-minded, to look at things in a new and different way, and that challenge isn't always easy. There may be things you have to accept, things you have to give up on. Maybe you have to accept that you're wrong. And, these are the kind of things that may be brewing with the full moon, and realizing that you've understood half the picture, but not the whole picture. And that means that you have to listen and explore and learn. And that very much might be the message. And you might also have to accept that perhaps in one area your outlook has been just ever so slightly too limited. I mean, I'm not saying that you have a limited outlook, but you just might recognize that really you should have been taking something a little bit further. Now, Venus is making a sextile to the North Node today, and I think that Venus sextile North Node does allow you to do the right thing. And the question is, what is doing the right thing? Well, doing the right thing is perhaps listening to other people, listening to your own aspirations as well. Your aspirations matter. An aspiration is different from an ambition. There's an important difference there. An ambition is often created by the past, by society, perhaps by one's family. If you sort of take a Freudian view, you have a super ego. You try to aspire perhaps to be how your parents want you to be. That's one way of looking at ambition. But just because you've got an ambition doesn't mean it's an aspiration. I mean, they may be the same. If your ambitions are the same as your aspirations, that is great, but very often then they are different. And perhaps now, Taurus, you need to think about something that goes beyond ambition. And that may be the challenge of the North Node in Pisces, letting go, realizing that you have a sort of wider destiny, that happiness cannot be defined in a simple materialistic way. There's just something else that you're looking for. So, with that approach, I think that you can adapt to the challenges of today, quite well. And additionally, Taurus, I think it is a time when you need to be as constructive as possible, and you should really try to see things in the best possible light. Now every Taurian has a fatalistic streak. It's good in some respects to have a fatalistic streak. We know, for example, nothing lasts forever, including our own lives, but there is a time to be constructive and positive, and to think that, of everything that could happen, the very best will happen. And Taurus, I think that, with that attitude, you can make all the difference. You can turn a day which might be quite challenging into really something quite sort of triumphal. You could really get a sense of where you're going. And so when you see a challenge, where you see something new coming up, you don't run away from it. You take the view, this is interesting, and this can really help you, move things along and move to a new level. And don't forget that over the weekend after the full moon, we've got Moon conjunct Jupiter, and I think that Moon Jupiter conjunction is going to be very positive for you. And I'll certainly be talking about that in my video for the weekend. In other words, my next video. So overall, Taurus, it's just important to be broad-minded. It's important to be positive. And if you see a challenge, if you're contradicted, if you experience an alternative view, don't get defensive, because sometimes it's necessary to listen to what another person is saying, or even to listen to what the universe is telling you. Perhaps listen to what your higher self is telling you. So that's the way forward, Taurus. So I think if you handle it right, things can be great. Gemini. We have the moon changing sign. Moon moving out of Gemini into Cancer. And moon in Gemini, it's been okay. I mean, it's good to have the moon in Gemini, you could say, but the moon has been, making a square. So it's making a square to Saturn. It's been making a square to Neptune. I think you could have been reasonably effective, even though it was in January the 1st, New Year's Day. It could have been okay, but I don't think it was 100% great. And so with the moon moving into Cancer, that does change things. It perhaps makes things a little more complicated, because as soon as the moon moves into Cancer, well, we've got the run up to a full moon, and also we've got moon opposition Mercury. In fact, as the moon changes sign, we have a T-square, and so this T-square involves we've got moon opposition Mercury, and we've got sort of Neptune on the T, and so this T-square, it might create some aggravation. There might be things that you start to be concerned about. You might, for example, start being concerned about what you have and what you don't have. It's the new year. What have you signed up to? And you look at what you've signed up to. You look at what you're committed to, and you ask yourself, perhaps, have you got what it takes? And that might be not a shock, but it certainly might diminish your happiness if you think about how complicated something might be, and it's not something you necessarily want to get involved with. It's just easier to just not open the file, not open the website, not look at something, not look at the documents. Why trouble yourself? Well, it might be a good idea to trouble yourself. I mean, you've got to trouble yourself at some stage. It's 2026 now. Friday, it's a normal working day. Things are back to normal, unfortunately, or fortunately. I don't know. Depends on your view. But Gemini, I really do think that it is important that you are as realistic as possible And with that moon opposition Mercury, with kind of Neptune mediating, moon making the square to Neptune, then changing sign, making it opposition to Mercury. Part of you wants to hide. Part of you enjoys the smokescreen, the illusion. Why make yourself miserable? But if you are realistic and you look at the facts head on, then it's not going to make anything worse. It's going to make things better, because if there's a problem, you'll be able to act to deal with this problem earlier, and you're going to be more effective. And it might be that early action could get rid of a problem altogether. I'm sorry to be negative, but I'm just looking at the chart. And I'm kind of talking to myself as well, because I've got my sun in Gemini, and we've got a full moon coming up on Saturday. I think it's Saturday. Yeah, it's the 3rd. We've got the full moon, and that full moon is in Cancer. So that full moon for you, it just could just force you to just be serious and to understand that things aren't necessarily simple. That you have to be able to deal with complications, and you've got to go beyond the surface. And it's not just about money and material stuff. It's also about emotions. People are complicated, perhaps more complicated than you'd like them to be. But at the same time, right now, Gemini, I think your ability to get on with people, it's not too bad. You're able to make contact if you want to make the effort. You might not want to make the effort, but if you take a sort of an easygoing, natural approach, then I think that people are going to like you. And it's even possible that the right person can really cheer you up. Maybe you need a different view. Perhaps you are taking something too seriously, and an alternative view can make all the difference. Cancer. We've got a build up to a full moon now, because we've got a full moon on Saturday, tomorrow, the 3rd, I think. So this full moon is important. It's a full moon in Cancer. Moon is in Cancer. The sun is in Capricorn. I'll be talking a lot about it in my next video, but it is something that you need to be preparing for. Now, with moon moving into Cancer, that certainly gives you a degree of control, and also perhaps a degree of luck. Regardless of what aspects it's making. The moon is in your sign. The moon is ruler of Cancer. It's in mixed reception with Jupiter. So you would not be given a set of challenges if you weren't able to deal with them. And in some respects, you are in a strong position, and you're strengthened by your ability to be sort of upfront and realistic. You're not going to shy away from things. You might like to, but that certain things just have to be dealt with. And when the moon moves into Cancer, it straight away makes an opposition to Mercury. So moon opposition Mercury can be about a difference of opinion. You perhaps realize that you are at odds with other people, or at least certain other people, and it may be difficult to express yourself in such a way that other people understand, or maybe other people are just being confusing. And the reason for that is not just because we've got moon opposition Mercury, it's because we've got Neptune's involvement. So yesterday we had Mercury square Neptune. Today, just before the moon moves into Cancer, it makes a square to it makes a square to Neptune. So we've got this T square, moon opposition Mercury with Neptune on the T, and so this T square could create confusion. And if you're trying to do something serious and sensible, which involves discussion and people trying to work out what their various responsibilities are, it may not be easy. So maybe, Cancer, it's a bad day for trying to find agreement. At least to find agreement in a way that is comprehensible. Yeah, you might come to an agreement, but you might not know what you've agreed to, and you might have misunderstood what someone else is saying. And this is a feature not just of today, but also of tomorrow. And while it's true that other people matter, I mean, other people must matter because there are 4 planets in Capricorn, your opposite sign. While that is true, you perhaps should, as far as possible, hold on to your freedom and your autonomy, and maybe you should avoid involving other people with whatever you're doing, unless it's really necessary. Because I think, where there are other people, there's also the potential for a problem. And on the plus side, if you are able to be self-contained and to do things your way, then over the next few days, I think that you should make progress, because the moon is eventually going to make a conjunction to Jupiter, and that conjunction to Jupiter, which takes place probably sometime over the weekend, maybe on Sunday. So when that Moon Jupiter conjunction happens, things are going to come together. So don't panic about the full moon coming up. I think it is an important full moon. And it's something that you do have to negotiate, but I think that if you maintain your own freedom of maneuver, you always make sure that there's an exit for yourself. You don't want to be stuck, and if you give yourself as many options as possible, I think you should be able to sort of get around the issue. And just don't forget that with the moon in Cancer, moving to this conjunction of Jupiter, you are fundamentally in a strong and perhaps lucky position. So don't be fooled or dispirited by outside events and by other people who may at times be incomprehensible. They might also be unreasonable, but it's nothing you can't handle. Leo. The Sun, it does remain on the Venus-Mars midpoint. I mean, it's just been stuck on the Venus-Mars midpoint for ages. It's still there. I mean, just a reminder, and with the Sun, conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint, it does give you the ability to get on with people. Even if you don't feel like getting on with people, you can be friendly, even if you're being friendly through gritted teeth. You can, and there's something about you that people like, and so don't feel that you have to do things on your own, that you have to sort of be isolated. It really is unnecessary. So do take advantage of this fact that the Sun is on the Venus-Mars midpoint. Now, aside from that, we do have the Moon moving out of Gemini into Cancer, and with the Moon moving into Cancer, it's all a bit difficult. I mean, not necessarily just for you, but we've got the Moon making an opposition to Mercury, and we've got a full moon, and because of that, Leo, you just might find that things aren't quite as they should be. You maybe want to do some hiding. You don't want to be in the public eye, not really, with the Moon moving through Cancer. I mean, it's not just Moon moving through Cancer. It is because the Moon is making an opposition to Mercury, and you're not quite sure what to say. I mean, I think that your concerns would be exaggerated. I think if you just say what's on your mind, if you act in a normal, natural way, I think you'll be fine. After all, as I've just said, the Sun is conjunct the Venus-Mars midpoint, so don't worry about that too much. So maybe in general, Leo, you've just got things to do, maybe in your own way. And if there's something that you can do without needing anyone's help, I think that would be great. I mean, we have got 4 planets in Capricorn. Capricorn is a very sensible sign, and this means, Leo, that you have an opportunity to make things comprehensible. And if you want to make things comprehensible, well, maybe things have to be moved around, and things have to be moved around in such a way that you can understand what's going on. I don't think you will thrive in a chaotic situation today, and indeed into the weekend. I think if you've got a chaotic situation, that's going to make things much worse. Make things much worse. So, if you're faced with chaos, perhaps chaos that's been building up over the last couple of weeks, then you have to address it, and you need to put things right, and perhaps ever so subtly indicate that you'd like other people to be more reasonable, and don't worry about putting gentle pressure on other people, because with the Sun conjunct Venus Mars, the Venus Mars midpoint, you have a natural charisma. People will listen to you, and if you say something with conviction and earnestness, I think that there won't be a problem. You will be understood. Now, it's not, you don't just have to worry about how things are put together. You can also think about your own the inspirational and perhaps spiritual side of things, because Chiron's going stationary direct today, and if you look at what's going on, there is no fire at the moment. No planets in fire signs. Because everything's left Sagittarius now. Nothing in Sagittarius. No planet. The only thing in a fire sign is Chiron. Now, I do not count Chiron when I'm trying to work out, elemental balance. But Chiron is stationary direct. So Chiron is very focused today. It cannot be ignored. Its power is probably much, much greater than usual. And yes, Chiron is in Aries. And so maybe, Leo, you're picking up on this Chiron energy. So Chiron, for you, might represent a higher aspect of yourself. It could represent your desire for something else. It could potentially represent, a spiritual wound. I mean, we are living in a time when a lot of people do feel spiritually wounded. And what do I mean by spiritually wounded? Perhaps feeling rejected by the kind of spirituality that would be ideal, and that might be to do with a church, it might be to do with a belief system, whatever it is, feeling that your path has been somehow denied to you. But now that Chiron is stationary direct, it might give you some sort of new inspiration. Something is perhaps calling you. You're being called to the right path for you, and the right set of beliefs for you. And in the past, it might have been a path that was closed, but I don't think it's closed anymore. So, do make the most of this Chiron energy. I think it is there for you. It's not immediately obvious. And this may actually link back to what I was saying about you not doing well in a chaotic situation. Because, if you are in a chaotic situation, then how can you understand what's going on? How can you separate, the sacred and the profane? The profane. What is profane? It is everything outside the temple. I think that's what it means literally. And then what is sacred, and what is the things that are important to you? But if they're all mixed up, and you've got sort of a lot of people talking about different things, and you've got objects all over the place. How can you get in touch with this Chiron energy? And so if you clear a space for yourself, then you're giving yourself an opportunity to get in touch with this energy. And I think it can be something very constructive, and perhaps it can realign yourself with some kind of spiritual path. Virgo. There may be a bit of a clash today or tomorrow, because we've got a full moon coming up, but more immediately we've got the moon opposition Mercury. So we've got moon in Cancer opposition Mercury in Capricorn. Now that's relevant to you because it highlights the fact that Mercury is your ruler, and Mercury has recently changed sign. And so with Mercury in Capricorn, you're thinking about what makes you feel happy, what makes you feel good, what is a fundamental expression of who you are. And getting in touch with that for a Virgo can sometimes be difficult. Perhaps, Virgo, you're thinking a lot about what you should be doing, what you're obliged to be doing, and you're not necessarily always thinking about yourself. But now that Mercury's in Capricorn, with a load of other planets in Capricorn, you've got 4 planets in Capricorn, and Capricorn is a sign which relates very well to you. It is about your identity. So if you feel good about something, you feel that it's right for you, then sure, you should go with it. But then Moon makes an opposition to Mercury, and Moon opposition Mercury could be about something trying to undermine you, something asking questions. Why are you doing that? Shouldn't you be doing something else? And it's possible with Moon opposition Mercury that you might have to defend yourself, either through words, or you might have to sort of literally decide, are you going to do this, which is in accord with what you want to do, or are you going to give in to someone else? And I'm pretty sure that you should put your own priorities first, but maybe you can put your own priorities first in such a way that other people aren't too offended. And I think that's something you can do. Virgo is a sign that can be somewhat harsh, and it can sort of ignore the human emotional dimension, maybe because it's messy, and let's stick to the facts. But if you make the effort, Virgo, I think that you can show other people that you're listening, and you can show that you care and you understand their point of view, but you can still, in the end, do whatever you feel is important, whatever you feel is necessary. So don't feel too conflicted about all of this. I mean, it's not necessarily always going to be easy. At the beginning of the day, Mercury is making a square to Neptune, just before it moves into Mercury. Well, sorry. Let's start again. The Moon at the beginning of the day is making a square to Neptune. Mercury is still making a square to Neptune. I mean, it's not as exact as it used to be, but that Moon square Neptune could be about uncertainty, just not being quite sure what you want to do. But if you just hold firm and you ask yourself, what is important to you? What are your fundamental abilities and the things you feel happy about? And don't forget your creativity as well. If you can just keep that in mind and give it priority, then I don't think there'll be too much of a problem. And really, Virgo, that's pretty much it. It's all about doing what's important to you and not being too upset by the pressure that other people put on you. There will be pressure, I think, but it's nothing you can't deal with. And so I think that it's a time to be really focusing on those 4 planets in Capricorn, 4 planets in an Earth sign, and you just finding something to do that you really enjoy and is a fundamental part of who you are. Libra. It's now the 2nd, isn't it? So January the 2nd, well, the whole sort of Christmas and New Year thing is coming to an end now, isn't it? It's real. It's 2026, and as you move into Friday, the moon is in Cancer. Okay, the moon might not move into Cancer until tomorrow, Saturday, if you're in Australia and New Zealand, but still, it'll eventually arrive in Cancer. And so with moon in Cancer for a Libra, it's great. I mean, it's a great place for the moon to be in, and it's about you starting to align to whatever it is that you want to do. I mean, not in a vague way. We're talking about your ambitions and what you want to get together, and perhaps what you're planning on for the new year. So as you move into 2026, there is a lot to do. You have to take advantage of the fact that Jupiter is in Cancer. Jupiter stays in Cancer until the summer. Sorry, when I say the summer, I mean the summer as in the Northern Hemisphere summer. From a Southern Hemisphere perspective, that would be until the winter. So with the moon now in Cancer, starting to make a conjunction to Jupiter, a very slow conjunction to Jupiter. I mean, moon and Jupiter are still 20 degrees apart, maybe more. But with that conjunction coming up, it's another time, Libra, to be thinking about whatever it is you want to do, whatever it is you want to get off the ground. And there's nothing to be ashamed about when it comes to being ambitious. Be ambitious, be as ambitious as possible, but be ambitious, on your own terms, not on anyone else's terms. Now, the moon, when it moves into Cancer, it does make some oppositions. It makes an opposition to Mercury today. So moon opposition Mercury could be about overthinking something. There's something you'd like to do, something you'd like to get involved with, but you think about it. And perhaps you think about it too much. And of course, if you think about something too much, and if you worry about it, and you create all sorts of different scenarios, well, if you do this and that, well, this could go wrong and that could go wrong, then you get absolutely nowhere. And so, I would suggest that you don't overthink things, and you don't allow yourself to be confused, because the moon in Cancer, in very early Cancer, is making a square to Neptune. Mercury has just finished making a square to Neptune. It's still pretty close, that Mercury-Neptune square. So there are a lot of things that could get in your way and that could distract you. And somehow, Libra, you've got to hold firm. And one way of holding firm is to be as positive as possible, to really think that things have changed, that the universe is on your side, and it works on several levels. It's about what you're telling yourself. If you have a fundamental belief that things are going to improve, then indeed things will improve. And also look at the feedback you're getting. How are other people responding to you? I think that if you say the right things, other people can respond to you very well. Indeed, you may get support for some of your ideas and some of your plans. Now, one area where you may not get much support, and I'm thinking ahead to the full moon over the weekend, is in terms of your home and your family. And your home and your family could be complicated because we got this run up to the full moon. I mean, this full moon is going to be across your the sort of home work axis in your chart, and so be ready for that. Be ready for things to emerge that that could be quite disruptive, but also just hold firm to what you believe in, hold firm to what is important to you. And I think that fundamentally you're capable of seeing things in a favorable light, seeing your own destiny in a favorable light. And if something feels good to you, then it probably is good, and all you have to do is just make sure you keep walking, keep moving, and in the end you'll get to where you want to go. And one other thing, Venus is sextile the North Node. So Venus sextile your North Node is just telling you that there is a way to make sense of everything, and more to it's not just about making sense of things. It is about finding your path, and maybe in the first instance you have to clear your path. But once your path is cleared, you can just, as I've just said, you can keep walking, keep moving, and you will be going in the right direction. Scorpio. Things are not necessarily 100% easy. You're aware of a degree of pressure. You're not able to entirely be relaxed. You're thinking about what's holding you back, and what you need to do. And Scorpios can be extremists. You take an extreme view, everything is either really positive or really negative. You're either completely free or you're completely tied up in knots. Which one is it? I mean, of course, the reality is somewhere in the middle for all of us, even if we're not Scorpios. And right now there is just this tension, and you believe that in order to move on, something needs to be changed. Something almost needs to be pulled down. And perhaps you're thinking, well, this is a new year, this is 2026, but what has changed? And you can still see the relics of 2025 around you, and those relics just don't feel particularly satisfactory. And so maybe something needs to be torn down, something needs to be changed, something needs to be broken down, and that is the only way of moving forward. And that is the side to Scorpio which thinks in terms of everything is binary, yes, no, black, white, good, bad, and that may not be entirely helpful. On the other hand, Scorpio, if you feel that some kind of change is required and the change hasn't happened, maybe, Scorpio, there are things you can do, things you can actually do to really sort of move things along. But don't get stuck. I think it's important that you don't get stuck. We do have a full moon tomorrow, and with this full moon, you may be encouraged to just over worry about certain things, and to worry too much about maybe particular details, or you're trying to work out, there's one idea, there's another idea, and how do you bridge these ideas? But the challenge here is to move beyond it all, and think about the fact that the moon is in Cancer. The moon is in Cancer. It eventually makes a conjunction to Jupiter, and so if in order to really get through this full moon, it goes back to the imagery that Aleister Crowley gives, which I do mention every now and then when talking about Scorpios. The three animals of Scorpio, the three Scorpio animals. The scorpion, the snake, and the eagle. And what I always say is, you've got to try as far as possible to be the eagle. it's not about hiding under a rock like a snake. It's not like, stinging yourself to death because the pressure's too high. If you're a scorpion, I don't think scorpions really sting themselves to death, even if they're surrounded by a ring of petrol. But still, you have to aspire to be the eagle. And that's always the case for a Scorpio. But I think that this full moon is particularly about the eagle, being able to move beyond things. Because if you don't move beyond things, with this moon opposition Mercury, you can tie yourself up in knots. You can analyze it. You can analyze it again and again. You can come to the conclusion that you're stuck, that nothing is happening. And that's only because you're seeing an obstacle up close. When you see an obstacle from, say, a height of 5,000 feet, you're the eagle surveying the ground below you. It's not so serious, and furthermore, you can see beyond the next obstacle. You can see beyond the next hill. You can see you understand how the land lies, and you understand where things are going, and things do become a lot easier. And so going back to what I was saying right at the beginning, Scorpio, I was suggesting that maybe you do feel that there is a lot of pressure, that something has to give, that life is a real struggle. But when you look at things from an eagle's eye, then things do change, and things certainly become a lot easier. And don't forget other people. This is not a situation where you are completely alone, I don't think. And if you're prepared to confide in another person or tell them what's on your mind, I'm not saying you have to give away your Scorpio secrets, but a bit of confiding wouldn't do any harm, and getting an alternative impression, because some people have a different view, and they may have a more sort of optimistic and relaxed view from you, and maybe getting that different view might really help, and might make you realize that you have been just too focused on one way of doing things, too focused on one set of problems, when in fact the problems you've been getting obsessed about may be nothing at all, and maybe getting another person's viewpoint could be quite useful. Sagittarius, you are able to make changes. You don't have to be satisfied, with the way things are. And indeed, you shouldn't be satisfied with the way things are. You just because you're not happy about something, because you feel slightly uneasy, doesn't mean you're stuck in anything. You're not, and you have the ability to not just change yourself, but you can also change other people, and I think that is important. So this is a time, Sagittarius, when you need to work on the people around you, even if they seem distant, even if they seem very stuck in their ways. By working on them and by showing your charm. And you might not feel that you've got much charm, maybe because what's been happening over the last couple of days, maybe over Christmas, you might feel just that things are a bit stuck, but perhaps you haven't been trying. And if you actually use your charm, I think that you can be very effective. And what is charm? I mean, charm needs a degree of understanding and support, sort of emotional support and emotional understanding. And emotional understanding, Sagittarius, is something right now that you very much have. It's natural. You don't have to force it. And so if you start to engage with people, then you're going to get a powerful response. Okay, to begin with, there might be a bit of friction. I mean, the moon is making an opposition to Mercury, but if you stay with it, then there can be some kind of change. And we've got this build up to a full moon as well. So because full moon is tomorrow, and so with this full moon coming up, that might be about an intensification of certain relationships. And they needn't just be close relationships. All kinds of relationships can intensify and become more meaningful. And most importantly, you can take control of the emotional dynamic. And that's perhaps unusual because we don't normally associate Sagittarius with emotions. But with Jupiter in Cancer and the moon in Cancer as well, you're more comfortable with your feelings than you realize. And if you go with the emotional current, whatever that current might be, then I do believe that you'll stay in control, and you do have the ability to get people's attention and get people to like you. And if you want to get closer to someone, I think this is a time that it can happen. You'll just know what to do, you'll know how to behave, and it's a way of being that is not typically Sagittarian, and it's not anything that will need last for for too long, but you can perhaps be someone else, and you can pretend to be someone else, and you're able to just be more sincere than usual. I'm not saying that you're not sincere, but you can really come over as being a serious, emotionally grounded person, if that's what you wanted, if that's what you want to do. And really, maybe it's as simple and as complicated as that, because it does sound complicated. The concept of Sagittarians having to get into something which they're not used to. But you don't have to try, and it should all come together quite easily for you today. And there is a full moon tomorrow. The full moon does present a few challenges, but it's nothing that you can't manage. Capricorn. Well, there are 4 planets in Capricorn. I probably said that yesterday as well, but do take advantage of those 4 planets in Capricorn. You're not going to get 4 planets in Capricorn forever. In a couple of weeks' time, those planets will be leaving Capricorn. So you've only got it for a couple of weeks. So make the most of this Capricorn emphasis, and really try to project yourself. I think you can project yourself. You can really tell people who you are and what you want, and you will have an impact. Now, it's not always going to be easy. We do have a full moon coming up. So the full moon is tomorrow, and the moon is already moving into Cancer. So it's a Cancer full moon, and so we have the moon opposition Mercury today. We're going to have moon opposition Sun and Mars tomorrow. In fact, moon opposition Sun, Venus and Mars. So that is a very social event. It can be a social event, or at least an event that sort of relates to you and another person. And it might be, from a relationship perspective, that this full moon puts one particular relationship really in focus. And what kind of focus is it? Well, I've already said that I think that you are in a strong position. Is the other person, if there is another person, they might find you somewhat overwhelming. I mean, you think about it, you've got these 4 Capricorn planets, which arguably represent you, and then you've got the moon in Cancer. The moon, okay, it will eventually make a conjunction to Jupiter, but the moon, as it moves into Cancer, seems a bit lonely. It seems a bit isolated, and so that may say something about where the strength lies. I think that in any relationship today and tomorrow, I think the strength, by and large, will be with you. You will hold most of the cards. And again, I'm not talking about any specific kind of relationship. It may be a short-term relationship. It may be a relationship that has nothing to do with anything particularly important. It's just something temporary. but it's still valid for the moment. It's valid for today. It's valid for tomorrow. And so you are in a strong position. And the question is, what do you do with that strong position? There is a danger here, Capricorn, that you might be quite overwhelming. I mean, you're capable of overwhelming, really using your strength, the strength of those 4 planets in Capricorn. But somehow, Capricorn, you should try to give people a chance to be themselves. Whatever the contact is, even if you are going for a walk and you have a 5-second meeting with someone, Happy New Year, all that kind of stuff. At that moment, in those 5 seconds, you perhaps have a power, and that other person feels that power, and just letting the other person be, even for 5 seconds before they walk off and you never see them again, just give them that opportunity, give them that space. Because, as I've just said, you are quite overwhelming. You can be quite overwhelming with all these 4 planets in Capricorn. And Moon in Cancer is trying to express itself, and it's difficult. And so that's something to think about as you move into tomorrow, as you move into the weekend, when the full moon becomes exact. But maybe other people don't matter. In which case, do enjoy 4 planets in Capricorn. Continue enjoying 4 planets in Capricorn, because arguably with 4 planets in Capricorn, you are, of all the 12 signs, the one in the strongest position. Aquarius. Not necessarily a day when you feel that you have to do anything. You would probably prefer it if you were just doing your own things, not being disturbed, not wanting your peace of mind to be disrupted. And there may be, Aquarius, things that you just feel that no one can help you with. There may be a lot of thinking as well, just thinking about yourself. I mean, it is 2026, and 2026, might feel as if there are sort of new challenges, and that you don't want to feel that you absolutely have to do anything. You know that in the end there are things you're definitely going to have to do. You know that, but not at the moment. And perhaps you would just prefer just to just exist. And there's nothing wrong with just existing, provided one doesn't get too obsessed about it. Though we do have a run up to the full moon, and the moon is moving into Cancer. And so with the moon moving into Cancer, you may be starting to think about obligation. What are you obliged to do? You kind of know there's something you should be doing, but you don't want to do it, and you would rather drift. So, Aquarius, it might be a case where you need a certain amount of discipline. You have to be sort of slightly tough with yourself, and there seems to be at least one thing you must do today, perhaps tomorrow, and you don't want to do it. But if you do it, I think that you will be saving yourself a lot of trouble. So ask yourself, what is it? I mean, don't spend too much time trying to work out what needs to do. It should be very natural, but somehow your brain is not fully engaged. I mean, maybe it's because we don't have any planets in air signs. In fact, if you look at what's going on, it's kind of been creeping up on me. I should have sort of mentioned it, but if you look at what's going on astrologically, we have no planets in fire signs, unless you count Chiron, and you have only one planet in an air sign, and that's Pluto. That's generational. And so this lack of air and this lack of fire, remember, you're an Aquarius. You have, you're an air sign. It's fundamentally a positive sign. And so you're not fundamentally being supported by the elemental environment. So you just might feel sort of out of sorts. Although what you should be doing is exploring perhaps this negativity. It may be rather unusual, this negativity, to be in a world which seems to be responding rather than acting. But the problem with all this negativity is you just might not know what to do. And yeah, as I've just said, there are things that need to be done, but the spark is not there. And so, what do you do? Well, perhaps you can get some encouragement from other people. I mean, other people are there for you. Perhaps you can't be bothered to reach out to them, but they are there for you. And your ability to relate is actually not too bad today. And, think about the people you know. Even if you don't want to talk to them, make the effort. You might hear something, or you might be encouraged to do something that perhaps it needs to be done. So there is a real possibility that today, Friday, and perhaps into the weekend, Aquarius, absolutely nothing goes on, and that might be what you want to hear. But I still think that there's something that needs to be done. And you're not doing it, and you probably need to work out what it is, because you'll feel bad about it later if you can't get it together. Pisces. I was just talking to Aquarius, and I was remarking to Aquarius that things are really very negative at the moment. And by negative, I mean we don't have any planets in air signs, except Pluto. We don't have any planets in fire signs except Chiron. Okay, if you're in Australia or New Zealand, the moon might be in Gemini, but soon enough the moon will be in Cancer. And so what you've got is a situation where you've got complete earth and water. Now, that might be a problem for an Aquarian, but I don't think it's a problem for a Piscean. From a Piscean perspective, it's all very natural. It's the way it should be. Things flow, things respond, things react, people react. They don't initiate. And for many of us, that might be troubling. But for you, Pisces, it's not troubling at all. It's absolutely something that you are comfortable with. And so, Pisces, you're able to go with the flow. And you can just respond in a way that is constructive. And with these 4 planets in Capricorn, you're able to seek out other people. I think if you have friends, you can benefit from friends. So don't feel that you have to isolate yourself. Because people are there for you, and you can enjoy people's company. But it's more than that. I think that with all these planets in Capricorn, you maybe have an opportunity to actually benefit. Maybe something you hear, maybe something you need that someone else is prepared to give. So I think Pisces, you're very much able to sort of get into the spirit of the day, and in the process you can create quite a lot of change. It's not obvious change, but the very action or even non-action of just being with someone creates a change. And you have this way at the moment of being able to get people's attention, to attract new connections. So don't feel that your social life is static. It can move from one thing to another, and as one person goes, another person arrives. So that's that's all looking good. And furthermore, Venus is making a sextile to the North Node, and Venus sextile North Node, that's a great aspect from a social perspective, and it means that you can be yourself, and you can be respected, and you can also move beyond existing boundaries and be able to get on with lots of different people, but in a way which is constructive for you. You don't lose anything. So Pisces, it's looking to me like a good day. And of course, we've got the moon moving into Cancer, and the moon makes a mixed reception with Jupiter when it moves into Cancer. So that means, Pisces, whatever you're doing, it can be a real demonstration of who you are and of your individuality. And most importantly, you just don't have to try too hard. You don't have to try at all. It's all very easy. Now, there might be a few complications later on, perhaps tomorrow when we get a full moon, but that's a challenge for the weekend, and I will be talking about that, about this full moon and its impact, when I do your horoscope for the weekend. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs, and it's now time to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Friday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 43, which is breakthrough. Now, when I did my 12 sign forecast and my overall view of the astrology of today, I don't think I was particularly enthusiastic. I don't think I was talking about all these sort of wonderful things going on. No, I was fairly downbeat, I think. But if we look at things from the I Ching perspective, this hexagram breakthrough, it has 4 moving lines. Now, 4 moving lines is quite unusual. It's not quite what we would necessarily expect for January the 2nd, Friday, January the 2nd should be a quiet day. But 4 moving lines does indicate quite a lot of action. There are things happening. One thing changes, another thing changes, we change. So that's how we deal with today, or how we might deal with today. Now, as far as this hexagram is concerned, this hexagram is not what it seems. Now, in the Wilhelm translation of the I Ching calls it breakthrough. And so breakthrough, it does sound pretty positive. We are making a breakthrough. You might think of a breakthrough in a sort of military sense, sort of armored columns being able to break through and progress. But in terms of the I Ching, I don't even know if breakthrough is the right way to describe it. It is about a potentially dangerous situation where we need to break through, but we need to break through in order to get out of something. It's breakthrough, like when the German army was trapped in Stalingrad, they needed to make a breakthrough to escape. Because if they didn't do that, they'd all be taken prisoner. They'd be surrounded. Of course, that's what happened, and very few of them ever got home to Germany. So breakthrough should not be seen necessarily in a positive way. We have a chance, perhaps, to escape something, but we can't hang on forever. And so it's kind of interesting, isn't it? That 43 is breakthrough, and of course Stalingrad surrendered in 1943. I don't know why I'm talking about Stalingrad. I was watching a YouTube video about Stalingrad yesterday, so maybe I've got Stalingrad on the mind at the moment. But so we have 4 moving lines, and so we kind of need to go through these 4 moving lines. So we might, for some reason, just be involved with something that is difficult, that's not easy to manage. And perhaps we're trying to extricate ourselves from something. And with the first line moving, we try, we would like to extricate ourselves, but it's not easy. It's not easy, and it just, to begin with, it just might be something that's just too difficult, and we don't necessarily want to over-involve ourselves with it. And then the third line moves. And the third line is talking about, well, one way of looking at it is something going wrong, but it's not so bad. Another way of looking at it is to do with our associations, who we're hanging out with. And it may be that there are people we are hanging out with, or situations that are hanging out with, that are fundamentally not good. They may be unpleasant. And we kind of have to continue associating with them. I mean, there are always people like that, aren't there? People always have to have someone who they know this person is up to no good. Maybe they know that they're a rotten apple or whatever, but they have to keep going with it. And you just have to make sure that it doesn't get out of control. And then the fifth line moves. And the fifth line is talking about the possibility of resolving the matter, of perhaps being able to escape. Escape is there. One can be dynamic about it, and perhaps that's what one should do. There is a moment when we're dealing with something, it's just got too difficult, and we can just get out. But the question is, do we get out? Are we going to leave it too long? Because the sixth line moves, and the sixth line can be about something being too late. We've left it for too long. I mean, that's one interpretation. Another interpretation would be that we think we've been successful, and we are congratulating ourselves, but we're congratulating ourselves too soon. Perhaps we've been complacent, and we can maybe snatch defeat from the jaws of victory or whatever. So if things start to resolve themselves over the course of a day, do not be complacent. See it through. And this hexagram got 4 moving lines. It does move to a second hexagram, and it moves to hexagram number 64, which is before completion. So maybe at some level in a previous hexagram, 43, maybe things weren't so bad. Maybe in the end we were able to create some kind of resolution to an extent. But we hadn't seen it through. We hadn't made good our escape yet. So before completion is, the symbol here is trying to cross a river. We're trying to get to the other side. Have we got to the other side? Well, no, we haven't. And things could still go wrong. We're in the middle of a river, whatever it is, the Yellow River, some huge river. So we have to be careful. But if we are careful, then there is a promise. Okay, maybe not the promise, but the possibility of getting to the other side. And that's what we're striving to do. That's what we're struggling to do today. And are we going to make it? I think we are, but we have to be careful. And additionally, as it's before completion, by the end of the day, we won't be finished quite yet. And perhaps this all links up to the fact we've got a full moon coming up, over the weekend. Maybe the full moon is that moment of completion, or at least we realize what we've done. Have we done a good job? Have we completed? Or maybe we've failed halfway through. But I think we have a bit of choice here. And if we're careful and we recognize the moment when it arrives, then I think we probably should be okay. So now I want to, let's see, what do I want to do? I'm firstly going to look at Chiron Direct, and then I'm going to look at this explosion in Switzerland. So Chiron is going direct. I make it that Chiron goes direct. Let's see when it is. Here's the chart for Chiron going direct. Now I make it. My program says 2:37 p.m. this afternoon London time. that Chiron goes direct. I got that from my software. I checked on astro.com. Always, if you don't have ephemerides, go to astro.com. Astro.com has just loads of ephemerides, and so there is an ephemeris for the cycle of Chiron, and that did concur that it was at 4:37 that this happens, that Chiron comes to a standstill. And there is this question about what does it mean, I think that one has to think about what does Chiron mean. And with Chiron, one thinks of one idea is the maverick of doing things differently and not following the crowd. There is also the wounded healer, that we are having to deal with our wound, and our wound can maybe sort of move us forward, because we have to perhaps have the wound in order to be a healer. I'm not entirely convinced about that. I'm not. I think that there is a problem. For example, in psychotherapy, isn't there? I mean, in psychotherapy, I realized that I would never be a very good psychotherapist, because I tend to treat things in a fairly cognitive way. I'm not really very emotional, and I can't really come alongside people emotionally. I'm not really good at that. But I certainly noticed that when I went to sort of introductory psychotherapy lessons, that so many people there who go there, they have their own wounds. They're there for a reason. They're there not because they have this sort of often they have this vocation to be a psychotherapist. Okay, they've developed a vocation to be a psychotherapist, but very often the reason is simply because something's happened in their lives, and they feel because something's happened in their lives, they want to be a psychotherapist. I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm being a bit harsh there. It's like saying that if you've been shot in the head, you want to be a brain surgeon. I don't know. I think that there is perhaps a problem there. About getting too much into one's wounds. So as far as what Chiron means, I mean, I think it's always useful to look at the discovery chart of Chiron, because I think perhaps in the discovery chart you might get some further ideas about what Chiron is about. So here is the moment that Chiron was discovered, and this came from a discoverer. I think an astrologer actually wrote to Charles Cowell, the man who discovered Chiron. An astrologer wrote to him asking when it was discovered, and he wrote back. And so we actually have the chart of its discovery. And I think it's important to look at what Chiron was doing when it was discovered. And Chiron is square Mars. Chiron was at 3 degrees Taurus, square Mars in Leo. And so that might indicate that there could be a bit of violence to Chiron, that it's perhaps about standing up for what one believes in, but it could go further than that. We've also got Moon-Jupiter conjunction in Cancer, so a strong Jupiter is perhaps how one perhaps might see Chiron. There is a Jupiter nature to Chiron, and Saturn's on Regulus. I don't know whether that's relevant to Chiron. Is Chiron about the fall of kings, the fall of empires? I don't know, but it's something we might want to consider. So those are a few thoughts about Chiron. So going back to what Chiron Direct is all about, and going back to the Chiron Direct chart. So with Chiron Direct, it could be a time when some of us are aware of our own wounds. Our wounds might come to the surface. So that might literally be how it works. For example, I've got these gum issues, and yesterday I did something really stupid. There was a grapefruit that was frozen, and I started. It was half frozen. I started eating this frozen grapefruit, and I really did my teeth in. I mean, it was my teeth still hurt. It reminds me, I've got to go and see the dentist. But I think it's a gum issue. I mean, don't worry. I think I know what it is. But the point is, so that's the wound. You have this wound, and you do something which stirs the wound up, and that's a rather sort of trivial example. So it may say something about if you. I mean, I don't want to project here, but maybe it gives one an insight into what Chiron Direct means, because we don't really have much to work on with Chiron Direct. So on a physical level, if you have a wound, maybe it's an old wound, be careful, because perhaps with with Chiron going direct, that wound might suddenly manifest. Perhaps it's something that you've got a vulnerability, but you perhaps overuse the part of the body that has the vulnerability or whatever, and something comes to the surface. So that might be a way in which Chiron Direct might work. It might also be about us tuning into our own individuality if Chiron is the maverick. And if the maverick is someone who just doesn't want to follow the crowd. We want to show that we're able to think outside the box. And I think that that might be a dimension of Chiron going direct. And then we have to look at what is Chiron doing when it goes stationary direct. And Chiron is square Jupiter. This is something I've been kind of meaning to talk about, and I never got it together. But with Chiron square Jupiter, Jupiter's in Cancer. Jupiter's exalted in Cancer. And perhaps with Chiron square Jupiter, it's perhaps the impetus to do something of a moral nature, to do something that is right, that is correct. So maybe that's one way of doing it. And you might also say that with Chiron in Aries, that there is a clash there. That's another way of looking at it. Jupiter in Cancer might be the accepted way of doing things, the accepted morality, and Chiron in Aries has to go beyond that. So that is an alternative view. Or we could just look at the midpoints that Chiron is on. So let's look at the 90-degree dial. One moment. So let's get to the 90-degree dial. And Chiron is there. Okay. So so we can look at Chiron's midpoints. So if we put the dial on Chiron, so Chiron is on the Venus-Pluto and the Sun-Pluto midpoint. So we've got a Sun-Venus conjunction, and there's Pluto. So there might well be a sort of a relationship angle to Chiron on the Venus-Pluto midpoint. Perhaps wounds from a past relationship might come to the surface. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. Or Chiron on the Sun-Pluto midpoint, there is a wound, may not be from a relationship, but it's something we feel, that wound. And with Chiron going direct, it's saying, well, we've got to do something about it. We've got to act. And that may be the link between the wound and the maverick. Why? They on the face of it, they sound quite opposite. On one hand, you've got the sort of a more passive side of Chiron, the wounded healer. When you've got the positive side, doing things that are different. Why do people do things that are different? They do things differently because something's happened in the past and they need to respond to it. So maybe this is what Chiron Direct is all about. But I don't really know. I mean, I'm sort of speculating. So it'll be interesting to see how it works. Interesting. Maybe we don't want it to work at all. I don't know. So now I want to finish with this fire in Switzerland. Again, you don't normally associate Switzerland with these kind of things. Again, you think that in Switzerland, they know how to deal with it all, and they've got regulations, and everything's well organized in Switzerland. But here is the chart for the explosion. Last time I looked, about 20 people were killed. I mean, that's a huge amount of people to be killed. I believe it was a fire. I don't think it was. From what I just looked at I just looked at Wikipedia, and the last time I looked at it was said it was 1:30 a.m. on January the 1st. And so what's kind of interesting about this chart is, well, Chiron is here. Chiron is on a descendant. Jupiter is on the midheaven. So you would not normally associate Jupiter on the midheaven with some sort of dreadful event, but apparently so. So we've got Jupiter square Chiron that's angular, and Chiron is, of course, square the ascendant, as square the midheaven as well. So maybe we're seeing Chiron in a different light here. So when we looked at the discovery chart of Chiron, we saw Chiron at 3 degrees Taurus square Mars at 3 degrees Leo, and so maybe there is a Mars side to Chiron. Chiron is about things going wrong, explosions. Mars in Leo. That Mars was in Leo when Chiron was discovered, and so that may be how the Chiron energy is manifesting. Here is the club, and Chiron in Aries represents a violent force which causes a lot of destruction. And we also have the moon in the 8th house. We have Uranus in the 8th house. Uranus is not on Algol, but it's retrograding back towards Algol. But it's not necessarily obvious what's going on. Now, one thing, by the way, that I did mention about January the 1st is that Mars was making a sesquiquadrate to Uranus, and I did make quite a big thing about it. Now, I'm not saying one could at all have forecast that Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus would have manifested in a club in Switzerland. I mean, why should it? I mean, one perhaps should have looked at the horoscope for when this club was founded. But Mars was certainly square sesquiquadrate Uranus. There is Mars, 135 degree aspect to Uranus. Uranus was in the 8th house, so that it certainly fits the event. But again, would one have been able to forecast how it would have manifested? Okay, you could have said, well, it's New Year's Day, people are having parties, and so with Mars sesquiquadrate Uranus, one of those many parties is going to be a tragedy, is going to be a disaster, there's going to be an explosion. Well, that's always going to be the case. I don't think that is saying anything new. I'm certainly not using it as evidence that astrology works. Well, I could also look at the new moon before the event. So this is the new moon, again, set for Crans in Switzerland. One thing about the new moon is that this new moon set for Crans in Switzerland has very similar angles. And you can see Jupiter's pretty close to the midheaven. Chiron is on a descendant. And so maybe there was a resonance there to the fire itself. So you have a new moon on December the 20th, and so you're looking for a time when the angles of the new moon are repeated. And that's kind of what we got with this fire in Switzerland. But it doesn't help us in terms of thinking about how we would predict this fire. Again, if we want to predict that fire, we would at the very least have to look at the horoscope of the club. And I mean, that's just impossible. Can I just be looking at these things all the time? Now, if you had been the owner of the club, Yeah, you might have been consulting an astrologer. You might, or you had the opportunity. Sorry, you would have had the opportunity to perhaps have consulted the astrologer to look at your chart, the key charts. You know that maybe you could have predicted disaster then. But I think with what we have, just looking at the event charts, looking at it in hindsight, I'm not sure how we would have worked it out. But still, I think that far may tell us something about Chiron at a time when Chiron is stationary direct. So thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.